As the citizens of Hayfield Township, Pennsylvania, settled into their cozy beds on the night of January 6, 1981, preparing for an impending blizzard, Lonnie Ray was gearing up for a different kind of storm. She had made the decision to finally leave her abusive husband, Bud, and knew that there was going to be a heated confrontation as a result. Sure enough, an argument erupted, and by the early morning hours of the next day, the 29-year-old mother of two had vanished without a trace. 43 years have passed, and we are still asking the question, what exactly happened to Lonnie Ray Rogers? Hi everybody, welcome back to my channel, and if you're new, welcome. My name is Gabby, and if you've never been here before, never watched any of my videos, have no idea what I do, I cover true crime cases, and all the cases that I cover are a little bit older. They're all basically 20 years or older, so if that's something that you might be interested in, maybe down below, click the subscribe button, and also make sure to turn on the post notifications to be notified every time that I upload. So, I have been covering true crime cases here on my channel for over 7 years now, and in all of these years, I have never spent so much time preparing for a video. Back in May, I saw a petition going around on Facebook. It was being posted by some people I had worked with previously for videos, and this is a petition I will discuss later on in this video, but the petition was in relation to a disappearance case out of Pennsylvania, the case of Lonnie Rogers. The more I looked into the case and the more that I knew that I wanted to dedicate a video to it. I reached out to a few people and was eventually put in contact with Lonnie's daughter, Alison, who I just spoke to last week on the phone, and she is one of the most dedicated people I have ever had the privilege of speaking to. Before I get into the case, I do want to sincerely thank her for speaking with me, answering any of my questions, giving me some updates, and sending me over some never before seen photos to include in today's video regarding her mother's case. Most of my research for today's video came from her book, A Daughter's Journey and Story of Resilience, which I will discuss later on, but this book will be linked down below in the description for everyone to check out. If you want to check out a true crime book that is so full of heart and so insanely thorough at about 500 pages, I highly recommend this book right here. This case is a heartbreaking one. It's one that needs to be discussed more, and it's one that after 4 decades is finally gaining some more momentum. This is the case of Lonnie Rogers. Lonnie Ray Rogers, known affectionately as Lonnie, was born Lonnie Ray Raffle on October 18th of 1951 to parents Maxine and Raymond Raffle in Youngstown, Ohio. At 8 months old, Lonnie was declared profoundly deaf, but this was something she never let hold her back in life. Lonnie's younger sister, Glenellen, or Glennie as most call her, was born July 6th of 1957, and her other younger sister, Mia, was born 7 years later on September 23rd of 1964. All 3 sisters, although years apart in age, were extremely close. They leaned on each other for support because they all had one thing in common: dealing with their chaotic household. Their parents fought often. Their father would accuse their mother of cheating, and he had a bit of an issue for a period of time with drinking and driving, and this highly affected his family because he was being fired from his jobs because of this. He worked for the highway patrol, and he was fired because he was drinking and driving on 2 separate occasions. Maxine and Ray were not bad parents, but they had their issues, and their children saw their issues firsthand, which is something, of course, children should never have to witness. Maxine and Ray loved their daughters, but this is just some of the stuff that the Raffle sisters witnessed growing up. They truly turned to each other for that sense of love, protection, and peace. Lonnie has been described as being bright, bubbly, and full of life. She was deaf, but she never acted like she was different than anyone else, and she didn't really view her deafness as a disability. She viewed it as something that made her different, special. She was someone that people really enjoyed being around. She always had a smile on her face. She attended public high school, Woodrow Wilson High School in Youngstown, Ohio, and this school was definitely progressive for its time. It had a class at the school for students who dealt with hearing loss and needed a little extra assistance. One really incredible story I feel the need to share was a time in high school when there was a field trip being arranged to go to a music concert. The school didn't include the hearing impaired class in these plans. This did not sit well with Lonnie. No, she couldn't hear music, but for someone who is deaf, they can feel the energy of the room and the vibrations of the beats. It's more of a body experience for them. Lonnie insisted that the hearing impaired class be able to attend the concert, but the principal told her no. What did she do? Well, she ended up holding a car wash, and the class raised enough money this way to attend the concert on their own. When I talked to Alison on the phone, this is a story that I made sure to highlight because I feel like even though I personally never got to meet her mother, this is a story that really shows the type of person that she was, the type of drive that Lonnie had, that if she wanted to do something in life, she wasn't going to let anything hold her back. She was somebody that really just enjoyed life, and if there was an opportunity to enjoy life a little bit more, she was going to do it. Now, while she was in high school, she did date a young man named Bill. Bill was in her hearing impaired class as well. Lonnie was just head over heels in love with Bill. That was her very first love, and she truly thought she was going to marry him, go on to have children, and grow old together. For reasons unknown, Bill slowly lost interest and ended their relationship out of nowhere. Lonnie was absolutely heartbroken. She definitely went through a rough patch of time after the split, but she eventually picked herself up. Even though she was pulling herself together after a breakup, she didn't really have love on her mind. She had her walls up and they were not going to come down easily. That is until she met Bud. One place that Lonnie enjoyed spending time at, a place that made her feel comfortable, was the Erie Silent Club located in Erie, Pennsylvania. The Erie Silent Club was established in 1942 on the west side of Erie. It's a club that is still in operation today, and it is a community organization that supports itself through memberships, donations, and fundraising to continue to provide an environment for people who are hearing impaired. It prides itself in being a safe space for those with similar struggles, but also similar values and interests. At this club, Lonnie met a man named Clinton Rogers. He went by Bud. Bud was immediately enamored with Lonnie. Lonnie, though, was friendly, but had her heart on lockdown. She was terrified of being hurt again. Bud was tall, over 6 foot to her 5'6". He was handsome. They were both hearing impaired and could relate to each other on that. But most importantly, he kept her laughing. She started loosening up and truly fell for him deeply. They began dating shortly after that night that they met at the club. When it comes to their deafness, Lonnie was born deaf, and her parents discovered her deafness at 8 months old when they realized for some time she didn't respond to louder noises and never turned when her name was said. It was later discovered that her ears had not fully developed in the womb. Bud, on the other hand, wasn't born deaf. He lost hearing as a result of a car accident. His father had slammed too hard on the brakes, and he flew down onto the floorboard and he hit his head. Lonnie was almost completely deaf. Bud, though, he could hear a tiny bit, but not enough to not be classified as hearing impaired. Lonnie's family, though, especially her mother Maxine, did not like Bud. Maxine just had this overwhelming feeling that he wasn't the type of person he portrayed himself to be. About Bud, Maxine told Lonnie's father, "I don't like him one bit." Both of them felt their daughter could do so much better. Lonnie, though, by this point, absolutely adored Bud, and nothing her parents said was going to convince her otherwise. This was the man that she wanted a future with. When Lonnie and Bud got engaged, Maxine actually sobbed over the news, and not in a good way. They were not happy tears. Lonnie and Bud tied the knot on October 21st of 1972 at Little's Corners United Methodist Church. After the wedding, Bud wanted to live close to his parents, roughly 25 minutes away, but Lonnie's parents were quite insistent that they stayed local to her family. As we know already, they didn't really trust Bud. Lonnie and Bud ended up renting an apartment owned by Lonnie's grandparents in Little's Corners, Hayfield Township, Pennsylvania. Very soon into their marriage, problems arose. Bud had a short temper. They would have arguments, he would take it too far with his behavior, lots of screaming, then he would apologize, Lonnie would forgive him, things would be calm for a short period of time, and then the cycle repeated. Lonnie was definitely consistently making excuses for how Bud acted, but this was the man that she loved. She wanted to believe he was the man that she saw at the very beginning of their relationship and that he was simply stressed and making mistakes. Over and over and over again, Lonnie kept forgiving her husband. Bud would end up volunteering at the local fire department right near the home. Lonnie's grandfather was one of the earliest members, and one of Lonnie and Bud's neighbors was also a volunteer. We'll come back to this neighbor soon. Bud, if we can say anything extremely positive about him, which is very little, he was a hard worker. He worked at Teledyne Penn Union as a machinist in the foundry. Lonnie worked at a local hotel cleaning rooms. They both brought in steady money, but fought regularly about their finances because Bud, although he was making decent money, he spent a lot of it. Not on bills or groceries, but on frivolous things. Bud ended up finding other ways to bring in money. Illegal ways. In February of 1973, he was arrested for breaking into a car. It's unknown exactly what he stole from the car, but he was caught by police. He had to appear in court, pay restitution and court costs, placed on parole, and was ordered to attend an accelerated rehabilitation disposition program. After all his money was paid for fees and he fully attended the program, the judge dismissed the charges. This isn't where his criminal history ends, though. Lonnie was so insanely embarrassed. She couldn't even believe what he had done. She gave him a chance, though, to make things right, and he seemed to be doing good for a while. The two of them wanted to have children, and that was the next step in their story together. Lonnie felt like Bud had done a lot to destroy her trust, but she was trying to rebuild that trust with him because she still wanted a life with him. I feel like a lot of us have been there in our lives where we have this person, doesn't matter who it is, it could be a friend, a family member, a significant other, where they just keep hurting us. They keep doing these things that are so insanely selfish, but we want to believe that one day they'll just stop. And usually they don't, unless something huge happens to where they have this moment where they really come to terms with what's going on in their life and that they're going to lose everything and they don't want to lose everything. Most of the time, people really don't change unless they want to. Bud wanted a boy and Lonnie wanted a boy because Bud wanted a boy, but overall, she just wanted a happy, healthy baby. The concern lingered, though, that their child or children would possibly also be hearing impaired. They knew that the chances of that were slim due to the fact that Lonnie was the only one in her family who was hearing impaired and Bud hadn't been born deaf and he had no family history of it. Lonnie and Bud welcomed their baby girl, Alison Maria Rogers, into the world on January 12th of 1975. While Bud continued working, Lonnie decided that she was going to be a stay-at-home mom and stay home and raise their newborn. As a result of this, Bud had to get another job. Lonnie's father helped Bud out and he got him a job at a local tavern called Dee's Tavern. Lonnie's father, Ray, was a regular at the bar. This is where the criminal activity continues for Bud. Money started mysteriously disappearing. The tavern kept coming up short almost every night. One time it was $80, then $90, then eventually it was $700. How did he manage that amount? Well, one night, Bud called the police and claimed that someone broke in and robbed the place. The glass on the door had been smashed, except it had been smashed from the inside of the establishment, and Bud had a gunshot through the front and back of his baseball cap, yet his head in between it was fine. Bud's story was that two masked men broke the glass, came in, shot at him, he pretended to be dead, they stole the money, left, and he called the police. Authorities didn't believe his story for a second, and Bud was arrested. He was taken into custody and he was released awaiting trial. Then he was arrested for a prior burglary. Remember that neighbor I mentioned before? Well, Bud broke into that neighbor's garage and stole $270 worth of tools. He pled guilty to both charges and was sentenced to 6 months to 2 years in prison. He was granted work release by the judge, though, meaning he was able to leave the prison to work so he could provide financially for his wife and young daughter. Lonnie at this time was flabbergasted. How could Bud have done this? All she wanted was a life with a man that she loved dearly, and he couldn't stop making these choices that put their relationship in turmoil. She just could not handle it anymore. While Bud was in prison, Lonnie's family really stepped up and were there for her emotionally, and she needed them, especially her sisters, more than ever. Even just to talk. And boy, did she need a good support system, because around this time, she found out that she was pregnant with her and Bud's second child. 4 months earlier, her sister Glennie discovered she was pregnant as well. So Lonnie, although so distraught over Bud, she was excited to be going through a pregnancy with her younger sister, and she couldn't wait for their children to grow up together as cousins. Right when things, though, started to feel like they were becoming even just a little bit stable for this family, their world came crashing down on them. Lonnie and Glennie's younger sister, Mia, ended up passing away as a result of appendicitis. It was one of those situations where she kept going to the hospital over and over again. They kept diagnosing her with other health issues and sending her home, until it was too late and her appendix burst. The loss of Mia sent a ripple of devastation through the family. They tried to pull themselves together the best that they could. While Bud was in prison, Lonnie welcomed their son, Aaron Randall Rogers, on October 14th of 1977. Bud was allowed to be there for the delivery, but that was it. After Aaron entered the world and he had a few minutes with him, Lonnie went home, and she went home alone. Yes, she had support from her family, but she recently lost her sister, and she didn't even have her husband there because of the selfish decisions that he made. When Bud was released from prison, Lonnie was adamant that he could see their children, he could still be their father, but she was not going to put herself through the instability and stress of an actual romantic relationship with him. This seemed to work for a bit of time. They were being civil and he was being respectful of her wishes, but it wouldn't last long. In the end, he would end up wiggling his way back into the picture. In late 1980, Lonnie and her children went to visit Glennie in Toledo, Ohio. She told her that she was allowing Bud to visit for the holidays. During the holiday season of 1980, Lonnie would end up feeling guilty, though, that Bud had to travel during the holidays from his parents' home in Erie, so she allowed him to stay through the holidays where they lived. He would end up staying for good, though. Soon after he moved back in, fighting between the two continued. Bud was described as being obsessive and controlling. Lonnie told him that he needed to leave, but he refused. Lonnie and Glennie talked about how miserable Lonnie was in this relationship and how all she wanted to do was get away from him. So the two of them decided that it was time for her to come up with a game plan of how she was going to leave him. The first step for her to leave was to make enough money to leave. She managed to secure another job cleaning hotel rooms. Her being able to be out of the house more at this time gave her a bit of freedom. It gave her a sense of a normal life. Bud, though, could not stand the idea of her creating any sort of life outside of him. He was the type of person who needed full control. At this hotel, she ended up meeting an electrical worker who was contracted by the hotel. His name was Arthur. Lonnie found something in this friendship with Arthur that she didn't have with Bud, and that was comfort. Arthur was a married man, and things with his wife were falling apart as well, but their relationship wasn't as toxic as Lonnie and Bud's was. Lonnie and Arthur weren't secretive, though, when it came to their friendship. It was a huge problem, though, for Bud because Arthur was a man. He was extremely jealous. One of these times, though, that Lonnie and Arthur went out, someone snapped a photo of them together and ended up showing it to Bud. To say that Bud was livid over this would be an understatement. Bud told her that she not only had to stop seeing Arthur, but she needed to quit her job entirely. And she told him no, she wasn't going to do that. Her job and her friendship with Arthur made her happy, and she wasn't going to give that up for Bud, who made her absolutely miserable. Lonnie tried to get Bud to leave multiple times, and he always said the same thing. It was his house and his children, and he wasn't going anywhere. That if anyone was going to leave, she needed to leave. And that was her final plan. She wanted to leave, but she wasn't going to tell him that just yet. Lonnie's plan was final. She was leaving Bud, but she needed to do it at the right time. But an irate and controlling spouse and another spouse yearning for an escape. I'm sure many of you know where this is going. Quickly, I want to give a rundown of the area in discussion. Right here in Little's Corners is Hayfield Central Hose Company, the fire department where Bud and Lonnie's grandfather volunteered at. Over here is Little's Corners United Methodist Church, which is where Lonnie and Bud got married. Here is where Lonnie's grandparents lived, and right here is the family home, the apartment where Lonnie, Bud, Alison, and Aaron lived. The time of Lonnie's disappearance was during the early morning hours of Wednesday, January 7th of 1981, but we are going to start the day before on the 6th. On the outside, it was like any other day for Lonnie Ray, but on the inside, it was the day that she knew she had been waiting for so long. the day that she was going to get herself and her children away from the man who tormented her mentally every single day. Bud left for work every morning quite early to start his shift at 6 a.m. Lonnie usually dropped Alison and Aaron off at their babysitter's house between 8 to 8:30 a.m. and then headed over to the hotel to start her shift. Aaron stayed with the babysitter because he was too young for school, and Alison would later be taken to kindergarten. Lonnie worked her normal shift at the hotel, but after work, she decided to head to her parents' home. She informed her parents of her plans to leave Bud, and of course, they were all for it. They never liked him. Her father offered her some money to help her get back on her feet after leaving. She accepted the money and let him know that she would keep him updated. He gave her $60, which is roughly $208 today. Ray told his daughter, "You're going to be okay," and Lonnie believed it. They had a warm embrace, and she left. That, though, was the last time he ever saw her. That night, Lonnie made dinner for Bud and her 2 children like any other night. From there, Lonnie cleaned up after dinner and put the children to bed. At the time, they lived in a duplex apartment. They had neighbors below them. That night, the neighbors below them reported hearing a lot of banging and yelling. Keep in mind, both Lonnie and Bud were deaf, so the yelling most likely wouldn't have been words. More than likely, it was screaming and things being thrown around. Possibly Bud was screaming out of anger and Lonnie out of fear. The weather for that night is pretty significant in this case. Events were canceled, there were weather alerts, and roads were deemed unsafe to drive on. People were told to stay indoors and prepare for a nasty blizzard. What happened during the tail end of Bud and Lonnie's argument is unknown, but the commotion eventually calmed. Why that is, we don't know, but we can only assume. According to Bud, this is his account of what happened. The argument ended and they went to sleep. He said he woke up around 12:40 a.m. and noticed his wife was not in bed with him, and he assumed she went to sleep on the couch. He said he went back to sleep, and when he woke up at 3 a.m. to get ready for work, his work was 40 minutes away, so he woke up a bit earlier. He said Lonnie was nowhere to be found, so he decided to drop Alison and Aaron off at the babysitter's house early and go out searching for her in the snowy conditions. Their babysitter, Sandy, awoke to Bud outside in a panic. She remembers he was sweating and anxious. He told her he needed her to watch the children earlier than normal that morning because he needed to go search for Lonnie before he headed to work. He used the oldest story in the book and told her that Lonnie left them and ran off with another man. Sandy was also hearing impaired, and she was extremely disturbed by his story. She had a bad feeling about it. She decided to hop on the phone immediately and call her daughter. She used a TTY, which is a teletypewriter, to let her daughter know what was going on. With a TTY, you type a message on it. The device encodes each typed letter into an electrical signal that sounds like a beep. The signals travel through the phone line to the other TTY, and the other TTY converts the signals back into letters and displays the message on its screen. During this call, she asked her daughter to contact Lonnie's parents and let them know that their daughter was missing. Sandy used her TTY to reach out to other people that Lonnie knew, but no one had seen or heard from her. Right off the bat, everyone was insanely concerned, considering everyone was told to stay inside for the night because of the dangerous weather conditions. Plus, if Lonnie really did need to get away from Bud for some time, she could have easily walked over to her grandparents' home nearby and stayed with them until morning. Bud had returned to Sandy's apartment around 7 a.m. and told her that he couldn't find Lonnie anywhere, and then he decided to head to work. After receiving the call about Lonnie, Lonnie's parents knew that something was extremely wrong. From there, Lonnie's grandfather and her father went over to the Rogers apartment and made their way inside of it while Bud was at work. The apartment was suspiciously spotless. Hours later, Bud picked up the kids from Sandy's and made his way back home. Sometime later, Lonnie's grandfather and father showed back up. Bud pretended not to hear the knocking. He was very hard of hearing, but he would have heard the loud knocking, and their family dog, a German Shepherd, who was there for protection and to let Lonnie and Bud know when somebody was at the door, this dog was barking. So Bud knew that someone was wanting him at the door, and he knew that it probably was Lonnie's father and grandfather. Alison remembers from that night that she was told to stay in the room with her brother by her father, but she could hear her grandfather, Lonnie's father, screaming at Bud. Ray was calling him a liar, asking him where his daughter was, and saying that Lonnie wanted to leave him, not the children. She would have never left her children behind. Bud told them to leave or he was calling the police. Lonnie's father said, okay, and he went ahead and called the police himself. He went ahead and phoned the Pennsylvania State Police Department in Meadville at 6 p.m. on that day of January 7th, 1981. By the next morning, searches for the missing mother of two were being conducted. Glennie left her son, Jason, with a friend and came into the area to help in the search. Everyone was completely frantic. Glennie noticed, though, that Lonnie had a king-sized pink blanket that she had received in a gift exchange at work, and that blanket was nowhere to be found. Bud claimed maybe Lonnie had taken it with her when she left since she loved it so much. But Glennie knew that something was up with this. When the police arrived, they noted that Lonnie's hearing aids, medication, purse, and glasses, as well as her Mustang and car keys, were all left behind. A king-sized pink blanket is later noted as missing, and Bud cannot account for where it is. During a voluntary search, police did find $60 in Bud's wallet, matching the $60 Lonnie's father had given her. When the money was found, Ray yelled and said that that was the money that he gave Lonnie to leave Bud. Bud said that the money was given to him by Lonnie for bills. But with no body and no concrete evidence of foul play, Bud's involvement in Lonnie's disappearance was not confirmed. As Glennie made known, Lonnie never went anywhere without a hearing aid. Even if the batteries on hers were dead at the time, she was still wearing it. She would have never left the house without it. A hearing aid didn't immensely help Lonnie's condition, but it did help her be able to hear muffled sounds. Lonnie mostly relied on lip reading or sign language to communicate with others, but wearing a hearing aid was something that kind of became a habit. I will repeat myself again. There was a blizzard during the early hours of January 7th. Where would Lonnie have gone, especially without her car? Could someone have picked her up? That's extremely unlikely. This was a time before we had cell phones on us to just call whoever. If she decided to call someone to pick her up, Bud would have been even more furious. Plus, everyone she knew checked out completely. As Glennie told the Vanished podcast, their uncle worked for the highway department plowing snow, and a buddy of his was plowing snow on the main road near the Rogers apartment on the night that she went missing. And he was questioned by authorities, and he told them that he didn't see a thing. Lonnie's friends and family, state police, firefighters, and local volunteers searched for miles. There was no trace of Lonnie Ray Rogers anywhere. Lonnie's work friend, Arthur, was questioned, and he was in shock over her disappearance. He feared the worst. He had simply wanted to get her out of this soul-crushing marriage and be a bit of support for her. Arthur was questioned numerous times by authorities and eventually crossed off the suspect list. No one believes that Arthur had anything to do with Lonnie's disappearance or that her goal was to leave Bud and run away with him. At this time, Alison and Aaron were 5 and 3, and Bud allowed them to stay with their Aunt Glennie after she headed back home after helping in the search for about a week. After talking to his sister Laura, though, Bud decided to take the children back, and there was nothing that Glennie could really do about it. He was their biological father. Bud's sister had kind of convinced him that Lonnie's side of the family was trying to take his children away from him. Glennie pleaded with him to please just let them stay, but he was not going to let that happen. Alison held on to her aunt the best that she could, but Bud ultimately left with the children and then took them immediately over to stay at his sister's home while he lawyered up. Alison described herself at this time as 5 years old, going on 20. She had to grow up very fast. She and her brother were so innocent. They didn't know what was going on. All they knew was mommy was gone and everyone was mad at daddy. They did not understand at 5 and 3, of course, the complexities of the situation, but they definitely would in years to come. Glennie tried to get custody of the children, but it was decided legally that Laura and her husband Jerry were a better fit to raise them. For the next 8 years, though, Lonnie and Bud's 2 children were shuttled from one temporary location to the next. They were alternately under the care of Bud, his sister, some friends, and foster care. There were times when he would take his son back in and leave Alison elsewhere, and she just feels like a big part of this was because she reminded her father so much of her mother. During one period of time when they were being cared for by Bud, Alison was about 8, and she ended up going to a neighbor's home saying that there was no heat, they were hungry, and their father hadn't been home in days. This neighbor watched over the children, took care of them, made sure that they were fed and warming up a bit, and then notified authorities. Glennie was there during the court hearing for this incident, and to her surprise, people were siding with Bud. The people were sympathetic towards him, that he was a working dad without a wife to help him take care of the children. The only legal repercussion he faced was that he wasn't allowed to own an animal for an extended period of time because he left their dog behind. They had a poodle. Glennie was in disbelief. Bud was reprimanded for leaving an animal alone for days, which is of course horrible. It is animal abuse, but he wasn't reprimanded for leaving 2 children alone for days. Well, on October 14th of 1989, Bud took 14-year-old Alison to the police station, stating that he no longer wished to care for her. The heartbreaking part of it all is that Alison was his interpreter, so she had to read his sign language and repeat it to the officer. The officer said that he couldn't just leave her there and asked what the problem was. And Bud signed, "She's bad." And Alison had to interpret that for the officer. Imagine this teenager sitting there and interpreting for a police officer, "My dad says I'm bad, and he doesn't want me anymore." Bud left her there, and Alison ended up finding a note in her pocket. And this note was from a guidance counselor, and it was the guidance counselor's number. This guidance counselor, Judy Dinsmore, told her to call if she ever needed anything. And if there was a time in Alison's life when she needed something, this was it. Judy actually ended up gaining full guardianship of Alison, and for the rest of Alison's childhood, she knew Judy's family as her true family. After being taken in by Judy, Alison's brother, though, did stay with Bud, and abuse did continue. Both Alison and Aaron were made to think for a very long time, mostly brainwashing by Bud, that their mother didn't want them anymore. As they grew older, though, they began to realize that that was the furthest thing from the truth. Glennie would have loved to be able to take them in, but she was never really given the opportunity to do so when they were younger. Both of these 2 children would grow up and take all of that trauma and use it to do some good in the world, though. Alison would eventually get to the point where she wanted to piece together her mother's story and find out exactly what happened. In May of 2020, Alison was reached out to by Suzanne Reed, a true crime writer who was working on a new book, and this new book was including Lonnie's story. They would end up forming a really great friendship. Alison refers to herself, Suzanne, another friend of hers named Rose, and Glennie as Lonnie's angels, fighting tirelessly for answers. Through the years, Glennie was really one of the main people calling authorities to see about updates in the case, but unfortunately, she was always told the same thing. They would tell her, "We're working on it." It just didn't seem like this case was active, even though they were saying it was. In 2021, Alison decided to create the Facebook page Justice for Lonnie to help spread awareness of her mother's disappearance case. She was so touched when the likes and follows started flowing in. People truly cared for her missing mother and wanted to see a conclusion for this decades-old mystery. A mystery, though, where most of the clues point to one individual. A lot of what I've covered in this video is information Alison later found out in life about her mother's life and the night of her disappearance from family members during her own investigating. Alison understands that without a body or actual evidence of a crime taking place, it's difficult for authorities to do anything. But how authorities dropped the ball on this one is mind-blowing. There was a large search conducted for her mother, yes, but it was almost like authorities never wanted to focus in on Bud too much. One thing that Alison discovered during her own researching is that a well had actually been dug up in the basement of her maternal grandparents' home. This well may have been uncovered at the time of Lonnie's disappearance, so maybe that's why they focused on it for some time later on, but nothing in any connection to Lonnie was discovered in this well when they dug it up. A button was located and sent over for further analysis, but no DNA could be found on it. Alison knew of her father's criminal history, the theft, vandalism, and break-ins, the time he spent in prison. She called the clerk of courts in the area and was astounded when they sent over 62 pages of records on Bud Rogers. This is when she discovered that he had actually been arrested for a felony rape charge. He had attempted to sexually assault a woman at knife point. This was before he ever met Lonnie, though. Glennie had actually had a pretty good relationship with her brother-in-law at one point. The news of this violent sexual assault that he was responsible for took her by surprise, but she knew it was the truth. It happened in about 1970, which was 2 years before Lonnie and Bud married. So chances are Lonnie had no idea about this. It's hard for anyone to believe that she would have ever given Bud a chance had she known about this. Bud only spent about 6 months in jail for this crime. He didn't even go to prison. The reasoning for that is most likely because the case never went to trial. His victim, a college girl, most likely didn't want to bring that sort of attention onto her. And back then, especially, one of the first questions they would ask you in court was, well, what were you wearing? Those who loved Lonnie the most, from day one, had their focus on Bud. They have just always felt like he had some part in what happened to her. With his criminal past, the way he treated her, the fact that she was planning on leaving him and breaking the news to him the very night that she went missing, it's just too many coincidences. Newspaper articles were released over the years, but none of them resulted in any promising leads. Bud, though, who is still alive today, has never been considered a solid suspect in his wife's case. Glennie feels that part of the reason authorities didn't ever want to fool with intense questioning of Bud is due to the fact that he was deaf and there was a communication barrier there. From Glennie's memory, they only talked to Bud in total through all of these years about 4 or 5 times, and authorities never once had an interpreter, which they 100% should have. That should have been the very first thing they did before ever questioning him. As Glennie told the Vanished podcast, one of the main problems is that through the years, Lonnie's case with the Pennsylvania State Police would be given to these young officers. Every time there was a new officer put on the case, the family would have to explain the entire story, send them over everything that they have, and every time it seemed like the ball was finally rolling a little bit in the case, even just a tiny bit, another person would be put on the case, and they would have to start back at the very beginning. It was just so insanely frustrating, and every single time there was a new person put on the case, they would get their hopes up, and there were some times that there were these people, these younger officers, that did seem to really care, but then a couple years later, they would be gone. When it comes to Bud, he seemed to be helpful at the very beginning of the case. He answered any questions that authorities had, even though they could barely decipher what he was saying at the time without an interpreter. Then all of a sudden, he refused to talk for years. Decades. Only about 7 years ago, authorities asked him to talk with them again, and he actually agreed. The only reason that it didn't happen is because, as Alison has said, authorities don't want to go through with the hassle of finding a court-appointed interpreter. Alison said that when she was 18, she went down to the station and authorities informed her that they can't let her know what is in the files regarding her mother's case, but they do have enough circumstantial evidence that points to Bud being responsible. Their only problem is that they don't have a body, and without a body, they can't prove that a crime was ever committed in the first place. She's been so desperate for answers that in 2023, she met with a hypnotist to uncover repressed memories of the night her mother went missing. Alison stated, "The most important thing I was able to recall was that there was not snow on the back half of my mother's car, and I didn't understand why. I remembered them arguing and loud bangs, but that was something I had already remembered. I just didn't realize it was that night. I remembered trying to peek through a crack in my bedroom door to see their hands, so I could understand what they were fighting about. Deaf people fight in grunts, not words. You would need to see their hands to understand what they were saying. When I cracked the door to see them, all I could see was the hallway. When I cracked it more, my father stomped down the hallway and told me to go to bed, and then slammed my door shut. They continued to argue for some time. I heard a loud bang that sounded like maybe a chair falling over, and then I didn't hear anything else. I fell asleep, and then at 3 a.m., I'm awakened by my father saying my mother left us for another man and he was going to find her. Bud back then drove a Bronco, and Alison believes that when he dropped her and her brother off at the babysitter's home that morning of January 7th, 1981, that her mother was still in the back of the Bronco, possibly wrapped in that pink blanket. The pink blanket that Bud has never given anyone a solid answer as to why it's gone. When it comes to what Alison thinks happened to her mother, she believes that the night of January 6th, 1981, her mother told Bud that she was leaving him. Bud lost his temper, a fight erupted. Possibly he strangled her to death and then disposed of her remains somewhere that is completely unknown to them. Alison leans towards the choking theory because multiple people have had arguments with Bud, and they informed her that he always tried to or succeeded in choking them. After Alison was dropped off at the police station that day in 1989, she cut all ties with her father. She stayed in contact with her brother, of course, but she wanted nothing to do with Bud. He's tried to reach out to Alison multiple times through the years, but she is adamant that that is a relationship that she does not want to rekindle. Lonnie and Ray Rogers vanished 43 years ago. So many of Lonnie's friends and family have passed away not knowing what happened to her, and her sister Glennie fears that she will also join them before ever learning of her sister's fate. Alison has done so much work to keep her mother's case going, and more people learn of it weekly. She's done numerous podcasts, including True Crime PI, the Vanished podcast, Moms and Mysteries podcast, and the Missing and Unexplained podcast. She also started working with the missing persons advocacy project called Light the Way. They are the ones who actually put me in contact with Alison. Here's Alison with the founders of Light the Way, Tates Nunez, and Shayna Richard. A few people on YouTube have also covered Lonnie's case, one of those people being Lord and Arts, who I have so much respect for. Then in the beginning of 2022, she released her book. Alison released A Daughter's Journey, a story of resilience on February 6th of 2022 with the hopes of spreading the word of her mother's disappearance and also inspiring others with her story of perseverance when it comes to piecing together what truly happened. If you want to check out the book yourself, I will have it linked in the description of this video. Many people watching today's video may be thinking, how can we help? Well, back when I first heard of Lonnie's case, I saw there was a petition going around on Facebook, like I said at the very beginning of this video, and this petition immediately caught my attention. This petition was created by Alison, and her goal is to create a law called Lonnie's Law, where family members of victims are granted access to police files about the case when it hits the 20-year mark. I cannot tell you how many families I have talked to personally that after decades, sometimes 4, 5, 6 decades, just want to know some of the details of their loved one's case, but authorities will not give them that information due to the fact that the case is still considered open. There have been families that have had to close their loved one's case just to gain access to the files, which is something that no family should have to do. The Pennsylvania State Police claim that they are working on Lonnie's case, yet they cannot provide any proof that they actually are. Alison stated, "There is nothing active about an unsolved crime after 20 years. Lonnie's Law would offer families the right to understand what has been done to solve their loved one's case. It also offers the family the possibility of making connections that otherwise may not have been known." Essentially, Lonnie's Law offers a new set of eyes for a case that has been cold for far too long, and it provides a sense of comfort to the grieving family that the case has been given proper investigative attention. The loss of a family member under such circumstances is hard enough, and forbidding the family to view the case records after 20 years is excruciating and prolongs the unfathomable pain of ambiguous loss. This opportunity also provides a checks and balance or a full transparency step in unsolved cases. I previously posted this petition in my community tab here on YouTube months back, and it gained hundreds of more signatures overnight, and Alison and the founders of Light the Way were extremely appreciative. It is completely free to sign this petition, completely free. You don't have to pay anything, and it will only take you maybe 5 seconds. It is a long journey towards getting this law established, but Alison is ready for it, not only to help the investigation into her mother's disappearance, but to help countless other families during their search for answers. I did ask Alison if there have been any updates in this case since her book was released 2 years ago, and she did say yes. Those updates, though, are to be kept private at this moment, just so it doesn't tamper with the potential outcome of this investigation. I am able to share, though, that just recently a billboard went up in the area Lonnie went missing from. It has been so many years, but we cover cases all the time here on my channel that are far older than this one that have been solved. We can only wait and see and desperately hope that all of the pieces fall together properly. Lonnie Ray Rogers has been missing since the very early morning hours of Wednesday, January 7th of 1981 from Little's Corners, Hayfield Township, Pennsylvania. She is a Caucasian female who is deaf and cannot speak fluently as a result. In 1981, she was 29 years old, stood at 5 feet 6 inches tall, weighed roughly 140 pounds, had sandy brown hair, gray eyes, a freckled complexion, and pierced ears. She left behind her purse, hearing aids, medication, car keys, car, and 2 small children. If she were alive today, she would be 73 years old. Anyone with information regarding the disappearance of Lonnie Rogers is urged to call the Pennsylvania State Police at 814-332-6911. I want to thank you all for taking a little bit of time out of your day to hear about Lonnie's case. This is a case that has been so insanely heavy on my heart for the past few months since I first came across it. I wanted to take a little bit of extra time and read Alison's book, and there are a lot of highlighted parts in this book because I basically use this as my textbook on the subject of Lonnie Ray Rogers. Like I told Alison on the phone, which is one of her biggest goals, is to not just highlight Lonnie's case, but to highlight who Lonnie was as a person. I want to thank Alison again for speaking with me. And like I said over the phone, I have an amazing group of subscribers, and I know that any case that they hear about, they care about, and they're going to do what they can to help. I believe wholeheartedly there is power in numbers, and again, the petition for Lonnie's Law will be linked in the description of this video. I hope you all have an amazing rest of your day wherever you are. Stay safe like always, and I will hopefully see you in the next one. Bye.